Welcome to this session of the Ancestral Healing Summit. I'm Lisa Bonis, your host, and my guest for this session is Eileen McKusick. Our topic today is honoring human interconnectedness, healing the ancestral rivers. Eileen McKusick is a researcher, writer, inventor, practitioner, educator, and speaker on the effects of audible sound on the human body and biofield. She's the founder of the Biofield tuning sound therapy method, inventor of the sonic slider, and author of the books Tuning the Biofield, Healing with Vibrational Sound Therapy, and Electric Body, Electric Health. She's here with us today. Thank goodness. Eileen, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks, Lisa. My pleasure. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here too, because we're Facebook friends, and you said something really interesting in a recent Facebook post about an ancestral awareness that you had regarding your tendency to slouch. And I would love it if you would share that story with us. I think it'd be a really great way to start this out.
Yeah. Well, I've one of the challenges that I've worked really hard to overcome in my life is not really being present in my body. I think a lot of people who have trauma early on, you tend to develop a coping mechanism of disassociation, of really just not being present in your body. I was tickled a lot. I was held down and I was tickled, and a bunch of older siblings, and I was the runt of the litter. And, in the grand scheme of how you can experience trauma, mine wasn't so terrible, but it was continual. It was chronic. And I was always in a defensive posture. And so all my life, I've really struggled to be conscious of the fact that I'm doing this unconsciously. And I've had a lot of body work, a lot of tuning, even working at the gym, like really trying super hard to be mindful of it, but still a tendency to lapse into unconscious slouching. And I think a lot of people can maybe relate to that, especially now that we, in the days of like this with your phone, and it's very easy to do that. But I was recently at this wonderful festival in California called Music and Sky. And a few of my friends were there, one of whom is a Biofield tuning practitioner. And we were hanging out, and I bent over to get something out of my bag. And she said to me, "We need to do something about your back." And so she grabbed a sonic slider this is a sonic slider. It's a weighted tuning fork, and it's got an amplifier boot on it, a circuit boot. And she held it into like the inside of my left shoulder blade, where I've had a knot, for forever, it seems. And she listened in, right? Because tuning forks kind of open you up kind of maybe psychically or sensorially so that you can hear more deeply information that's present that in ordinary reality you don't always perceive. And she says to me, "You don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." And I said, "I know that. I have a team. I've learned to ask for help. I've learned to delegate. Like, I am not carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I used to. I figured it out. I let that go." So she listens more deeply. So she's just listening. All of a sudden, she says, "All the men are dead." She said, "They've all gone off to war, and they're either dead or they've come back broken. And the women are shouldering the burden of everything. They're tending the animals, they're tending the kids, they're making the food, they're working in the field." She called it the grandmother's lament. And there was just something about that, right, that just kind of tore through my body. I was like, oh my God, like think of all the women throughout history. I mean, just saw this thing today with somebody from the CIA saying, we've had 5 generations of warfare. And what that means and what has happened to the men and how the women have really had to carry the burden and not really been acknowledged for it. Think about that, the grief of losing husbands and fathers and sons, but still having to carry on, and like the heaviness of that, right? And that, whether that's in my own lineage, but it's in the whole human story. And so it was really wild. There was just something about connecting to that thought that just made my shoulders go whoop, just back and down. And I was like, oh my God, am I just carrying around this matrix burden? Right? And that just listening in and hearing it and acknowledging it and being like, that's not even mine. Like maybe I've worked through my own stuff and now I'm just like, "Ugh," got the grandmother's lament on my left shoulder. And ever since then, it's been a lot easier, I have to say, to stand up straight. Yeah.
I felt that so hard when just reading what you wrote and hearing it again, because we've all got this, even men, it's not just women that are carrying this. As you said, we've had, world wars, and even if it wasn't a world war, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, it affected the entirety of humanity. And so we all are carrying this, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we are all carrying the burdens of our ancestors, the undigested, unintegrated, relentless trauma. Men would come home from those, and women too, damaged and garbage in, garbage out. So then it all rains down on the families, even if they weren't at war. Dad comes home with the vibe, and it's just like, "Ugh." And I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with over the years whose, dad went to Vietnam or dad went to Korea and came back and like, then home was very difficult after that.
Yeah, yeah. And well, let's go ahead and get to our topic today is honoring human interconnectedness. And we've already sort of started to touch on this, but let's go a little deeper in your view and your experience. How are we all interconnected?
Well, where I'm going to go with this today, Lisa's, it's a little far out. And, but I think that, people can hang with me. The way it all ties together is really interesting. Um, and it starts with a story where I was walking, in a nature preserve with a friend of mine, and we were on a path, and then we had to stand aside as a sort of gaggle of loud, very scented humans walked by us. And my friend said to me, I wonder what trees think of humans. And I said, well, let's ask and find out. So we walked down the path a little bit till we came to this big tree that seemed amenable to being questioned. And we both closed our eyes and we put our hands on it and we just listened. And we listened for a little while, and then we both kind of opened our eyes at the same time a few minutes later, and we shared what we heard. And we both heard the exact same thing, which is so interesting. And we experienced it slightly differently. But the first thing we heard was the projection of our own minds, being like the tree was like snarky about humans. And the tree's like, "Rah." But then we knew that that was just a projection, right? So we both listened deeper. And so the way that the tree communicated to me was it showed me how it didn't identify as an individual identity. It showed me how it was connected to, and the same thing really, of all the trees that had come before it in that species, right? That they grow and that they don't they don't grow far from where they fell. And so it's all really the same, like falls over and nourishes the soil and the new ones grow. And so its consciousness was completely connected throughout time to all the trees that came before it and also all the trees that were going to come after it. Right? So and all the trees in that species. Like so its experience of time was really different than mine because I, as an individual human, don't have that same conscious connection to the humans who came before me that I came from. Right? That kind of like just my Vulcan mind meld of like connection. It's just not there. And I just thought that was so interesting that so basically what the tree said to us was that you little humans walking under me in this moment, such a tiny blip, it's irrelevant. Like it's irrelevant because I'm vast and contain multitudes and exist over this time span of time. It's very profound. And I walked away from, and that's exactly what my friend had too. She saw the exact same thing, this sort of timelessness and connection to all that is. And I walked away from that being like, why as a human do I not have that same kind of awareness? If I'm part of nature, which I am, I'm made of nature, right? Which is the next part of this conversation, then I should be able to have that sense of connection to humanity, the humanity that's come before me, the ancestor, but I don't. And I think this is part of the whole colonization thing. It doesn't matter what tone your skin is. We've all been colonized. We've all been largely, especially everybody I know in Western American culture, disconnected from our ancestors' traditions, from our ancestors' stories, from our ancestors' food, our ancestors' relationship with the land, all of these things that would keep a continuity of awareness and connection have been severed. Right, for so many of us, we just don't even, and American culture is so now and forward that it's sort of like, oh, we want to forget about the old country, we want to forget about the old, so that there's a kind of like almost willful disconnection from the ancestors. Certainly there's no honoring of ancestors or feeding of the ancestors or acknowledging of the ancestors, right? So we sort of have what I think I described as like the ego firewall that stops us from having that same sense of connection that the tree lives in all the time.
Yeah, yeah. As you're talking, I'm reminded of. It's been a long time since I've read Dune, but the mother, Paul's mother, she as part of her initiation into this priestesshood, she was brought into the memories of all the mothers who came before her, and then she would pass that on to her daughters, etc. I may be getting it wrong, but the idea is the same, that what you're describing that the trees have isn't an unfamiliar concept for it, but we don't have that, as you mentioned, a conscious connection with our ancestors and our descendants. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And the story that you referenced kind of gave me chills, because I think that's probably how it used to be, that there was that information, that sense of connection, that sense of lineage was passed along. And then you become much more than just you, because you realize that you're the sum of all of these parts that came before you and the sum that will come after. It's very enriching, right? And broadening. It just makes you so much bigger, because you're not just this individuated expression that has no connection in the past and no connection in the future. I mean, I think one of the big issues in our culture is this sense of isolation and separation, and that this is a really big part of it.
Mhm. Yeah, and we're also dealing with, you've been working with what you're calling mind viruses. Paul Levy uses a similar term with Wetiko, et cetera. But when you're working with, maybe we should first define mind viruses. Talk about that a bit, if you would.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've observed in my work with tuning forks with people, and basically what I do is I generate a tone and I bounce it off people, and it's sort of like a wall of white sound, and it will bounce off and kind of come back with patterns like sonar. And so I've discovered there's a whole tonal landscape that surrounds our body. I've mapped it, right? This is my Biofield anatomy map. Uh, and I've learned that different sounds that I hear in the forks mean different things, maybe different emotions, different stories, different um, inner expressions of motion that generate different sounds coming out of us, just like as if we were an instrument. And I've made the observation that sometimes I come across something that is what I would call not self. That it's got that it's something that's almost like an attachment, or a maybe even a parasite, or just a thing, that is not self. And one of the most common ones that I come across is a construct that I call the inner critic. And just about everybody's got it. And it's really the cause of most people's problems, quite frankly, is the voice in their head that's mean, that they can't control. That is speaking unkindly, that is playing into a belief of unworthiness, and then gets in there and like hammers on him, like, you're not good in this way, you're fat, you're ugly, you're not good enough. Like, that's sort of in many people, it's very relentless. Okay. That is not self. That's not self. It is like a program that is running, that is destructive. And, I often say to people, like, if you had a voice like that outside of you, somebody following you around saying those things, would you tolerate that? And everyone's like, absolutely not. And then I say, well, why do you tolerate it inside your own mind? Why? because it's in stealth mode, and it makes you think that it's like you, and that it's inevitable, and that it isn't anything you can get rid of or change, right? So that is a mind virus. It's not you being clear and present and constructive and loving and kind inside your own being, but you running an additional program that is destructive, that is unkind, that may even induce suicidal ideation, or, it can become very violent. And then it can cause you to project things onto other people and really just create a whole lot of distortion and dissonance in your life. And I think when you start to realize when that is running, and the sound that it's making, and the way that it's making you feel, it's like having a virus in a computer, right? It's like things are bogging down. It's sucking up juice and time and airspace. It's like slowing down your productivity. It's basically useless. It comes in the guise of like, oh, I want you to be a better person, but it's not. Like, you could have a kind, constructive voice in your head, right? So that's a mind virus. Is we get an imbalance in our system, almost always related to self-worth in some way, and then this kind of almost external energy comes in and links with it, and then keeps it running. And then you think it's self, and it's making all this discomfort in you, but it's your own imbalance from trauma, from ancestral trauma, from wounding, from all these stories that were bad as humans, kind of gets your own field out of whack. And then this other energy kind of comes in and almost feeds on that. And then you're stuck in this sort of virus sort of situation where you have chaos and entropy running in your field, that is getting in your way of living your best life, basically, right? So a mind virus is any kind of program that's disruptive and not self, where you think it's self, but it's really not. So these programs can be deleted. Like, you can delete that inner critic. Like, you don't have to live with that. Like, if you don't have control of what's going on inside your own head, who does? And I think that it's a really wimpy story when people tell themselves, like, I can't control this. Well, it's your job to control it, because nobody else is going to come along and fix it. And this is the number one thing that's getting in your way of you being a healthy human, right? In most people, I find. So I think even just recognizing, like, oh yeah, I have that pattern, I have that thing, and it kind of eats at me, right? It doesn't feel good. And that's not self. You mean I can delete that? I might want to keep coming back, but you just have to keep deleting it. Like, just Control Alt Delete. Pew, or we go pew pew. And then let that settle, and let a coach, like, hire an inner coach instead of an inner critic. An inner coach is going to say to you, hey, yeah, you kind of didn't do that as well as you could have. Why not? Well, because this happened. All right, well, next time, do a better job. Like, you can have positive, nourishing, constructive inner dialogue that is self, instead of being consumed by what is not self.
Right. I really like that you're using the word that it is self or is not self, because I think we can all agree that we have this sense that if we are completely pure and cleansed of all the gunk and all the garbage, we can be very sparkly beings with all kinds of, wonderful abilities, et cetera. But we've inherited all of this crap from our ancestors who picked it up along the way. So I guess, how can I word this? If we are inheriting energy patterns from people who really didn't know about this kind of thing, and they were just trying to survive their own traumas. Now it's become a part of us. It's become a part of our energetic makeup. How is it differentiated from our true self? How can it be removed if it's so interwoven in our isness? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really good question, because it's been going on for generations, right? This is definitely trauma, and the belief that, that we're guilty in some way compounds and has compounded through the generations. And there's a group of people that I become aware of, that I work with, that I call the karmic cleanup crew. And that's people who I believe have incarnated here and now with the purpose of cleaning up the mess of all of this inherited stuff. Because it's really, when you look out in the world and what it's doing, human beings are just getting more and more um, overwhelmed by the difficulty in being human, I think, at this point, interpersonally, personally, how we relate in the world, it's becoming incredibly difficult for people. And because we're carrying this very heavy load of generations of a lot of unresolved stuff. I always find, in when I'm listening to people, and there's structures in the biofield that I call the ancestral rivers. And they're like flows of information that go along the sides of the body, about 10 inches off. And on the right side, I find information from the father's DNA, and on the left side from the mother's. And, if your dad was an alcoholic and he came from alcoholics, and I stick a fork in that ancestral river, I can hear like generations of problems not being solved, generations of just garbage coming downstream from generation to generation. It's destructive, and and what's sad, and like you said, is that as humans, we have so much potential. Like everybody does. We're so brilliant. We're so amazing. Underneath the noise and the chaos, we're actually programmed for harmony and for play and for creativity and for pleasure and the life experience without all of this noise and mind viruses and suffering and tension as a consequence. Life can actually be pleasurable. And I think that's getting harder and harder for people to have that experience because of all of this trauma. So you asked what people can do about it. So the very first thing that you can do about it is just become aware. If you've been struggling with your own issues and you've been giving yourself a hard time because you think that you should have gotten further or healed more or be shinier and happier, I want you to really understand what heavy lifting you're doing. Because your parents didn't do this work. The vast majority, did yours, Lisa? I mean, my parents' work was like 5 o'clock is drinking time. And, they were drinkers and smokers and dancers and sort of bon vivants, but they didn't deal with, there was a whole lot of generations that just don't talk about it, don't deal with it. And so it just goes underground, and then it's like people's own little private hells inside of themselves, and the generations of, it starts to pour out. So don't give yourself a hard time. Don't add to the mind virus of the inner critic by beating yourself up because you aren't fully healed yet. You are doing very difficult work. It's heavier lifting than you realize it is. Okay? So be patient and kind with your own healing process. Don't heap guilt and shame and criticism on top of it, because that's just feeding a mind virus. It's super important that you be loving, compassionate, patient, and kind with your own healing process.
Yeah.
And know that it's possible, that in a way, this is all just noise in the signal. Our signal, our true signal, when it's free from all of the distortions that come from all of these trauma responses and the patterns of tension that they create, it's just sort of like being a musical instrument that's been beat up, and tossed around and not tuned. Does it still have the capacity to make beautiful music? Yes. It just needs to be brought into tune, and the strings all be made the right tightness. And that's all possible. In fact, one of the things that I've become aware of is that, in a way, because there's been decades now of people doing this work, and I just taught a class actually on ancestral rivers and mind viruses. And as I was feeling into the energy of that group, I was like, you know what? I feel like we've kind of stepped up a step out of the heavy muck. I feel like the early responders here who had their sleeves pulled up and were doing the work to clear in themselves and the others, because there's a lot of people have developed a lot of techniques, family constellation therapy, emotion codes, Mortar's work. Like there's a lot of people out here doing work that works, and people who are actually starting to get more free. And that informs the whole collective. So I kind of feel like we've gotten to a place where it maybe can start to be a little bit easier and a little bit faster because a lot of the muckety muck has been dealt with, honestly. Is that something that you've kind of tuned into, Lisa?
Absolutely. I've been hosting the Ancestral Healing Summit. This is going to be our fifth year. And the first year, it was fascinating and I really enjoyed it, but it felt like we were just sort of slogging through the mud. And over the years, it feels like something has shifted. Maybe we've had that 100th monkey scenario come to where we've gone past the tipping point. There's still plenty of work to be done, but a shift has absolutely occurred, and I'm so glad that you've brought this up as well. Yeah, there's something that's different.
Yeah, and I just got chills all over my whole body when you said that. I completely agree. I think there's something that is different, and I think that that the people who are coming on board now, who are like kind of new to this, I just don't think it has to be as hard or take as long for you. I really don't. I think that the people who came before you have been in the muck and have been in the trenches and have been healing this stuff, and that it is really informing the collective. So for those of you who are here who've been doing this work on your own or with others, thank you. That it's important and it matters, and it's not selfish in any way to spend the time and the energy bringing your own system into coherence and balance. It's absolutely necessary and appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad we're on the same page here. And I hope that people who are listening to this will say, yes, I am part of the karmic cleanup crew. Thank you for noticing I exist. So yeah, that's a really wonderful point. Now, before we drift off too much, I want to ask you about the ancestral rivers, because I've heard you talking about this for some time now. I've got so many questions, and I finally got you right here in front of a microphone. The ancestral rivers, you say one is on one side, one's on the other. They're about 10 inches from the body. Because the human energy field goes all the way around the body, do you have any idea why are they like posts? Or do they go all the way around?
I mean, they might go all the way around. It might be kind of like a level or a layer, honestly. But the way that it appears to me when I work is sort of more kind of two-dimensional. If I have somebody lying on a treatment table and I'm coming in on the plane of the treatment table with a tuning fork, this is where I hit it, about 10 inches off the side of the body. And they're maybe like an inch to an inch and a half wide. And you'll be going along in the field, which is really sort of combing through somebody's memory banks. That's what my version of the Biofield is, where all your memories are stored. And everything will be in a particular tone, in a particular song, a particular key. You're like, oh yeah, this is all you. And then you hit the ancestral river and it's a completely different thing. Like it just feels different. You can feel the motion in it. What I feel like is that what came before us, our dad and his parents and their parents, is upstream, and that information is flowing down, and then it goes down past your feet, and that's downstream, and that would go to your offspring. Assuming that you have them. And if you don't, then you're just the end of a branch of information. But any work that you do, even if you don't have offspring, goes upstream and goes cross stream and comes down in your cousins. I mean, it's all vibrational information. And wherever you make an adjustment anywhere, it's going to affect the whole, because it's all connected. It's all connected in time. And it's all connected in space. We're all kind of hanging out here together as vibrational packets of information. And we are absolutely informed by the collective. We're informed by what came before us, and possibly even informed by what comes after us.
Okay. Well, so then I guess the next question is, given that they exist on either side of us, and as you said, as you're moving in toward the body, memories, parent, and then you move past that into the actual person's, I'm not sure the wording that you use. How then are these ancestral rivers that are on either side of us, how does the discordant information in them actually affect what's inside of them? Again, I don't know if I'm making sense with the question. Hopefully
Absolutely.
You get what I'm saying.
Well, if you think about it, like this is like the DNA stream. Okay, so this idea that this is the information stream of all the humans that came before you, right? And not like what the tree is connected to. Through this flow really of information through time. What is it? It's the flow of information through time, and it's expressed itself in different humans, but every human adds to that record. And so, for example, if I come into the ancestral river of somebody whose dad was an alcoholic and his dad was an alcoholic, that river feels turgid. Like the quality of that, it's like and so what that's going to do, and remember that their DNA is inside of you. DNA is not fixed chemistry. There's really no such thing as fixed chemistry. In the vibrational model, everything is just waves in space. It's really all just music in a way. And so our DNA is just flowing music, it's flowing information, and we can change it in an instant. We can when you stick a tuning fork, in that ancestral river, the tuning fork is going to initially resonate with whatever chaos or distortion is present. We get to hear that song of that family, right? The tone of that song and all the garbage that came downstream and never got resolved, and the fights and the eggshell homes and all of that. It's all in there. It's all, that story is all present there. It's all recorded. But what's so amazing about the human body is that we're self-tuning instruments. And so when I stick a fork in that record and the body hears all the dissonance, the body will use that feedback to start to bring itself into tune. We're self-tuning instruments. So we can actually shake the noise out of the signal of what we've inherited, get that to settle down. It's almost like tuning into a radio station, it's like static on either side of the sweet spot. And that's what's going on, all in the static of what came downstream. But you can switch the dial and bring it in so that you get, the fact that, all of these people survived and reproduced and obviously had strengths and gifts and the bright, shiny potential inside of them too. So when the signal to noise ratio shifts from being noise to being more of a clear signal, your body actually relaxes. Any place where we've got noise, right? There's a car alarm going on outside. What do? Tense up. So even if you've got all this noise inside of you, it's creating a kind of tension, whether you realize it or not. And once that settles down, all of a sudden you're like, it's quieter inside here. Another way that we can be informed by our ancestral rivers, I remember once very distinctly working with this client whose mom had anxiety, and anxiety shows up in the signal like, and dad had depression, and depression shows up in the signal like, and this poor woman was going back and forth in her inner experience between depression and anxiety. And she'd wake up some mornings and she'd be depressed, and she'd wake up other mornings and she'd be anxious. And of course she was like, what's wrong with me? Nothing other than your downstream of noise. And now it's in you. So it's not your fault. And if you're trying to fix this at the level of me and mine, you're not going to get anywhere, because it's beyond that. It's bigger than that. You inherited these tonal and rhythmic proclivities from your ancestors. And now these rhythms and tones are simply playing out in your organism. And so can these be resolved? Absolutely. Just like any instrument can be tuned. And this is the whole premise of biofield tuning, is that we find these dissonant areas, hang out with them, give the body the opportunity to tune itself. And I think, as part of this, like everything getting faster, like it doesn't have to take, I've spent decades, Lisa, and you probably have too, in personal growth and healing. Decades of slog. Like I had to create a whole healing methodology to clear out my stuff, actually too, because part of my important work too is the Sing the Body Electric work that we're doing with our voices from the inside to bring ourselves into tune too. So that's, biofield tuning and Sing the Body Electric really were what it took for me. And, not to say that there aren't plenty of things out there too, to get to this sweet spot of being able to live in harmony, have all of that stuff tuned out of my system, and the ability to just rest in this moment and be okay without being uncomfortable inside.
Mhm, mhm. I, I have another question about if we've inherited, not if, we inherit this from our parents. And so now it's part of our ancestral rivers. And when we have children, we pass that on to them. So if we were to clear this before having children, they will not inherit it. But if we've already had kids and now they've got it in their fields, if we clear it from ours, does it holographically clear it in them too, or do they also need to do the work?
I would say, it's going to be different from person to person. It's hard to give kind of a blanket answer, but I would say, yeah, that the more you clear in you, the obviously the more that's going to affect your kids, and I can just look at myself. I have two sons who are 22 and 25. And, they've been around this work. One of my sons is actually a biofield tuning practitioner. They get it. It's been an interesting journey just within our own family to understand, because I think like a lot of families would end up in these moments where we would just be like, with each other. And you're like, what are we even doing? And why are we kerfluffling? Like, what is this even about? Right. And so what we really came to see collectively with is just family patterns. I come from a family that just yelled a lot. And my husband's family has their own dysfunction in dealing with stuff. And I think everybody's got their public persona that they can hang out with and be chill and be coherent. And then you go home and scream at your kids, and you're like, why am I doing this? Well, because your mom did or your dad did. And this is just what is in you, this sort of subconscious programming of garbage in, garbage out. And so they have a self-awareness around blind ancestral patterns in their 20s that took until I was in my 50s to figure out. Right? And I've watched them make very conscious choices to not indulge that kind of energy when it comes up, because they're like, that's just the family pattern trying to play out through me. I don't need to latch onto that. I don't need to act that out. None of us want to have that experience. I'm going to recognize that kind of as not self in a way. Like, it is self, but I'm able to choose to not indulge that and find a more constructive, functional way through this instead of this blind default bleh, that's right. So many families do.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. Now, I want to ask if we happen to have a tuning fork, say a sonic slider, can we work on our own ancestral rivers? And if so, how?
That's a good question. Well, to be honest, one of the most powerful sessions I ever did on myself was it through the ancestral river on my mom's side. I was in a hotel in San Diego. I was out there to teach a class, and I wasn't even tired, Lisa, but I kind of got in early. Class wasn't until the next day, and I was like, I think I'll tune myself. And it's not something that I do a lot because I would rather have somebody else tune me, quite honestly. It's sort of like, but in this particular one, I got into like all of this poverty consciousness on my mom's side. Because I think part through like living through the war, living through the depression, really going to that place where they didn't have food and they were bombed out of their home, like really like a very devastating, like nothingness kind of experience, and the trauma of that. And when I was done, I totally knocked myself out. I lay down, I slept for 3 hours, and I wasn't even tired. I wasn't even tired. I was like, whoa, I done some heavy work. I'm like going down. So that was from using an unweighted fork in the ancestral river. But I think that, if you're really, it always depends on the individual. How curious are you? How adventuresome are you? How much do you trust yourself and your own impressions? Right? Because for people who are like new to this sort of thing, it might be kind of confounding. Like, I don't even know what to do. Like, you're better off just seeing a practitioner or listening to one of my recordings. But if for those of you who have tuning forks who are kind of curious and adventuresome, what you can do is you can imagine that your body is on a couch or a bed. You can just imagine, okay? It's what I call project a hologram, and people always want to make it way more complicated. They're like, well, how do you do that? I'm like, you just imagine that you're there. Like, you're a kid, and I tell you, imagine you're there. Kid's not going to have a hard time with that at all. They're like, okay, I'm imagining that I'm there, right? So, and then you just move your fork in towards the body until you get to be about 10 inches off of where your body is, and you'll hit the ancestral river, and you'll feel the fork vibrate more in your fingertips. Like, I can feel it vibrating more. No matter what the condition is of the river, it's going to vibrate more when you get to be about 10 inches. And you can close your eyes and you can just tune in and just keep an open mind and be like, what am I noticing? What am I feeling? And you may have a whole bunch of information come in depending on how receptive you are. You might have ancestors come in and contact you. You might feel connected to your grandmother 3 generations beyond. Somebody might give you a really good recipe. Like, you might feel certain feelings. And just by staying there and witnessing, just witnessing and feeling and being curious and compassionate and forgiving, and just being present with whatever arises, and just kind of staying with the fork. And you can even do it sitting next to yourself. Like, you don't even need to imagine a hologram, although sometimes I think it's a little bit easier to be sort of standing up and being like, okay, this is this is where my body is, and that's about 10 inches, and like, oh, look there. It's sort of magical in a weird way, that you can just say empty spaces, information about me, and move the fork through it and actually find it. It's strange, but it works. And we've had thousands of people figure out how to do this. It's not that hard. So I think that willingness to just sit with, be curious about, trust your own impressions. You can put in prayer, you can, add anything you want to the mix about wanting to tune and heal this ancestral line and whatever subconscious tension you're carrying in your own body and mind that is informed by that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I thank you so much I'm going to be trying this. I of course now have questions about, is there anything that, for somebody who would like to try this, is there anything we need to watch out for? As you mentioned, when you did this, you knocked yourself out for 3 hours, and maybe that's not the right way to say it, but you slept for 3 hours. Is there anything that we need to sort of just be aware of to make sure that we're not doing any harm?
Well, I don't think I did any harm by knocking myself out and making myself take a 3-hour nap. Do you know what I mean? And I think that actually the outcome of that was pretty significant. I mean, there was a real heaviness in that I was carrying, and I felt a lot lighter afterwards. So there isn't really necessarily harm in that. But one thing I would say is that after you work in the ancestral river, you always want to bring yourself to the midline of the body. So to not just come here and end, but like after you feel like it's done, when you're doing any kind of energy work, you're like in it, and then you kind of know and sense and feel when it's done, right? So then when it feels like it's done, you just want to bring the fork to the midline of the body, and any energy that was kind of trapped there that wants to come to the midline. This is the central channel of the electrical system. Right. So this is biofield tuning, is really just a process of combing through the field to the midline and then moving away from the body. So that's biofield tuning in a nutshell. It's like whoop, whoop. So to just do what I would say is complete the adjustment of coming into that center and then focusing the fork that way. And you can do that on your own body, or you can just imagine it, if you've got yourself on a couch or a bed or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then that just helps to kind of bring you back into this moment, your own body, here and now, and focused and connected to now, so that you're not still kind of hanging out in that realm. But I would also say, when I was talking about connecting with the tree and kind of having that Vulcan mind meld with the tree, I just want to invite people, when you're doing this, to go into that Vulcan mind meld with your ancestors. Really open your mind and be like, I want to connect with this stream of information that came before me thousands and thousands of years. Like, how many years? I don't know how many years, like a long time, right? And that kind of brings us to this other piece, Lisa, that I wanted to share that I think is really important regarding what is in like like way back, right? So I think, based on what I've seen, the very first life forms on Earth were mushrooms, were mycelia, were fungus. And recently, I became aware of the fact that if you look at a close-up image of the mycelial network in the soil, which is all very fascinating, that basically there's all of these tendrils that are connect through the whole forest floor, that are mushrooms that connect everything and send light and fluids and information, and it's like this whole network of connectivity through the fungus. That when you look at it that closely and then you look at the human body, it looks just like fascia. And we accept, I mean, really exactly the same, Lisa. Like the mycelial network and fascia look the exact same and do kind of the same thing, right? Fascia connects everything in our body. It connects electric current, it transfers fluids. And the more connections that we have, the healthier we are. The more tightly knit our own fascia network is, and turned on and not clogged up, and then the healthier our organism is. And I think we get like, oh yeah, I have bacteria in my gut, and I'm a lot of bacteria, but I think that fascia is mushrooms. It's mycelial. It's the same thing, right? So what's going on in the soil with the mycelia, it's going on in our bodies with the fascia. And that this goes all the way back to the origins of life itself. That, as life has evolved and with increasing complexity, from single-celled organisms to the multi-celled organisms that we are, that the same fundamental stuff of life itself that has been present from the beginning of life itself is in us, makes up us. We're not that different than the soil, right? So we are nature. So I think this is super important because one of the issues that humans have is this disconnection from nature. And yet, if you think about it, like you're mostly water molecules. And what is that? Like the water that's in you isn't any different than the water that's in that river out there or in that cloud. Really, it's all one water. Your electrical system, it's all one electricity, right? So we're individuated, but we're made up of stuff that is timeless, that's been around forever, and that has all the information of what's been around forever, and that's in us. So the more we become curious about what kind of record we're holding in our body, right? Because so much of our education and our media saturation and all of this disconnects us from that magical connected place that indigenous cultures live in. They don't live separate from nature. They recognize that the nature that's in them is the same nature that's out there, that I'm not part of nature, like I am nature. And our own guilt and unworthiness disconnects us from that magical connection to all that is, that the life in us is connected to the life around us, and it's all the same life. And that this whole thing of like guilt and unworthiness is a mind virus that's complete nonsense. Like, why would the water in you be unworthy? Why would the light in you? Why would the mycelial connections that knit through your whole body, like what about that could be unworthy in any way, right? So this most important mind virus to clear is this unworthiness, because that's what creates the ego firewall that separates us from the magic that's inside and outside and all around. And that the mushrooms are our ancestors. Yeah. And that they're still living in us.
Yeah. Wow. I don't think I want to ask any more questions because I don't want to distract from what you just said. Those are powerful words. So let's go ahead and wrap there. I want to make sure that I mention your websites. You've got three: biofieldtuning.com, electrichealth.com, and of course, biofieldtuningstore.com. Tell us the difference between those.
Sure. Well, biofield tuning tells you about biofield tuning and what it is and how it works and how to become a practitioner. if that's what you want to do. It's a very rewarding practice, that's for sure. I've been so grateful. It's taught me so much because it really allows you to really see and hear people and really see the beauty that's inside of them. I would never know how beautiful and amazing human beings are if I hadn't had the gift of being able to listen deeply to people's souls, quite frankly. It's been an incredibly illuminating and beautiful experience. It's very satisfying practice to practice because it really does help people get out of pain, and especially the karmic cleanup crew that's out there looking for help. They're like, I'm here to heal my lineage. What do I do? And you're like, I can tune you. So that's really useful. Electric health is just talks more about the electric nature of life. This is something that's really been hidden from us. We've been, most of us, indoctrinated into a world of solid, liquid, and gas, and we're not told about plasma and ether. And these are very important states of matter that once you understand them and they become part of your cosmology, give you a lot of tools for solving problems that you don't find in the world of solid, liquid, and gas. So it's a whole revelation to me when I came to understand that my body was electric and that the world was electric and that the stars and everything. I'm like, oh my God, there's all like light. It's not dark and disconnected and random. It's light and it's connected and it's orderly and intentional. Like everything that we've been told about life is wrong and depressing. And so this whole new electric cosmology, I think, is really, it was the light that I was looking for, quite frankly. You know, I was a seeker for a long time. I'm like, something's wrong here. And then when I saw the light, I was literally, it's a state of matter that no one told me about. It's kind of bizarre. And then biofieldtuningstore.com, over the years as an inventor, I've created a line of tuning forks. I've invented different prototypes, different tuning fork accessories. I've created a whole slew of recorded Biofield tuning sessions. So they're all there. And yeah, and I do monthly classes and things like that. So you can kind of see whatever my upcoming offerings are at the biofieldtuningstore.com.
Right. Wow. Gosh, I don't want to stop talking, but we're almost out of time. Thank you so much for being with us today, Eileen. This has been illuminating, fascinating, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. And I want to remind everybody, I've been talking with Eileen McKusick, and I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation in the Ancestral Healing Summit.